And thanks for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Welcome to the program here at YouTube live stream and also all of the subscribing platforms that carry the show. And my guest is none other than Larry Klayman. He's the author of It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. Larry, I've been following you for years. I admire your work at Judicial Watch. You've changed American history. It's just an extraordinary development. You're almost out there alone. You guys have been nonpartisan. You've gone after both Democrats and Republicans. You seem to be out there acting as in the best tradition of the legal profession, trying to root out corruption when you see it. And in your case, it's public corruption. Now, your book deals with claims of corruption or imbalance in all three branches of the federal government. So why don't we start there? What is the condition now of our three branches, and what can we do about
Well, thank you, Charles. And since the time that I ran and founded Judicial Watch, I ran for the Senate in Florida. I didn't win, thank God. I don't think I'd be good on the inside. And I founded Freedom Watch. I'm actually the chairman and general counsel of Freedom Watch. And we do today at Freedom Watch what I used to do at Judicial Watch. But in terms of the book, this is something that's been inside me for a very long time. It's called It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. You can pre-order it on Amazon.com and all the major booksellers. It'll be out October 27th. And I go through all three branches of government. And the book is dedicated to Thomas Jefferson. And the branch of government that is the most dangerous of all the three is the federal judiciary.
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson believed, and he actually opposed the creation of the federal judiciary. He said they will be no more honest than the rest of the men and women in society. Of course, he didn't add women at that time. But eventually, because they're unelected, unaccounted to the American people, they would become despots. They would become tyrants. And it would cause another revolution. And he actually predicted that we would have to shed the blood of patriots yet again. I'm not advocating that. This book is for peaceful and nonviolent means. But if you take the three branches, quite apart from even the judiciary, the executive branch, and we've seen that in the last 4 years under President Trump, the so-called deep state is more powerful than the president of the United States, the intelligence agencies, and everyone else around the president. The legislative branch of government is highly corrupt. There are a bunch of court jesters and clowns, totally bought and paid for by special interests, money being stuffed into their pockets. They've accomplished little to nothing. And I have to say, even the so-called Trump judges that they have gotten confirmed, the Republican establishment, Mitch McConnell, I've been in front of 8 of them so far. They lack courage. They lack a clear vision of what they want to do. And they're little better, frankly, than the Clinton and Obama judges. The president was well-intentioned, but he didn't know who he was appointing. They were put on his desk, these names, by the Republican lobbyists and establishment people. And frankly, they're a bunch of hacks, the ones I've been in front of, without exception. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we get to the judiciary. And, I go through my various experiences with the judiciary over 40-some years in the toils of the federal court system. And I point out that while I scored some major successes, I barely scratched the surface. This is not a book that, beats my chest and says how great I am. It basically says that we, the American people, need to turn off cable news, stop being entertained, and get to work and rise up and form a coalition to take the country back to the vision of our founding fathers. And I have various suggestions on how to do that. One is the citizens' grand jury. We need to mete out justice ourselves. And Justice Scalia, back in 1992, in a case United States versus Williams, said the grand jury belongs to the American people, not the three branches of government. We have the right to impanel grand juries, to indict, to have citizens' trials, to convict, and even mete out sentences. Even to citizens' arrests. I'm not advocating violence, but we do have that right. And the American people can at least get to that point to attempt that. Hopefully, Trump will be reelected and he would enforce the sentences. But look at what's happened. We just now new information this week that Hillary Clinton was even more involved in the Steele dossier. Comey's gone free. Clapper, Brennan, they've gone free. The Lovebirds, Strzok and Page, gone free. The Obamas and the Clintons and the Bidens Our Attorney General, our so-called Attorney General, who I call Blowhard Bill, says they're off limits. His great investigator up there in Connecticut, Durham, can't even issue a report before the election. He's so afraid of blowback on himself. And that's where we are in Washington. Because of this deep state, because of the intelligence agencies controlling everything and having dirt on most people, it's mutual assured destruction, and the government has ground to a halt. I don't, frankly, Charles, even view it as a government anymore. We don't have a government, and we are in worse shape, in my opinion, than we were in the days and months and years leading up to 1776.
I think your analysis is accurate, and it comes from personal and professional experience. I had the opportunity to interview Tufts Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy professor Michael Glennon, who wrote a book called Double Government. And even though he didn't agree with my conclusions from his book, and he was this establishment player. He was a Senate counsel under Obama, I think, or Clinton. He points out that since the national security agencies were created by Truman in 1948 by executive order, they have worked their tentacles into all three branches of government, and they have a huge presence. And I think that's what President Trump is talking about when he talks about the deep state. They've got off the books income. They've got phony corporations. They have their hooks into several of the Supreme Court judges, Congress, the presidency, the cabinet, and that this is the deep state. It's both sides of the aisle. It's both parties, and that it has interests other than that of the American people, who expect elected representatives to make law, not this kind of alternative administrative entity that has its tentacles actually all over the world. So your idea of impaneling a grand jury is really a fantastic one, because I think the founders understood that the jury anyway is essentially almost a legislative entity, that they can nullify bad laws. I mean, I'll give the example of in 1850, there was a jury that nullified the Fugitive Slave Act, pointing out that it was unconstitutional. And that's really a power that most people don't realize, and certainly judges don't let people know when they're impaneled into a jury. And that is that a jury can nullify bad laws. So you're talking about, I've never heard the concept of a citizen grand jury, however, that is actually set up on its own or not in response to a specific proceeding. Is that what you mean? So define that a bit more.
Yes, well, in fact, several states allow for citizens' grand juries. They're regulated by the judiciary, however. For instance, in San Mateo, California, believe it or not, California of all places, you could walk into a grand jury that's already been convened, present evidence, and seek an indictment against an individual. And many years ago, we thought of doing that with Gary Condit, who was thought to have possibly been the reason that an intern died in Washington, D.C.
That case.
Sandra Levy, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what got me interested in it. And if you look at the history of grand juries, they are impaneled by the people themselves. They're controlled by the people. That's what Scalia said, in theory. We didn't have a Justice Department until the late 1800s. So therefore, we had citizen justice, particularly throughout the West. And I'm not saying you go out and lynch people or take matters into your own hands, but if you can impanel a relatively neutral group of citizens to make decisions on who should be held accountable and who should be not, that unfortunately is where we're at right now, because we see that the establishments of both parties protect each other. They're getting fat and happy and rich. Go to Washington, D.C. these days. Unbelievable amount of building, unbelievable amount of richness, never a recession. You watch these pundits on TV, whether it's Fox News or MSNBC or CNN, they're all friends. It doesn't matter whether they're conservative or leftist or center. You know, they're
right.
all just, their feet are all feeding at the trough. And this has just simply become entertainment, which is why I've said, if you're a conservative, turn Hannity off, okay? Turn it off. You hear the same thing every night anyway, so what's the difference?
Right.
And get to work and join a group like Freedom Watch and our citizens' grand juries. We also have brought lawsuits against the Communist Chinese over COVID-19 in Dallas, Texas, class action. Attorney General didn't do that. And even the president himself, as much as I support him personally, he just calls the Chinese names. I mean, that doesn't do anything.
Right.
Freeze their assets. So we've asked a court of law to take action. Whether they do or not remains to be seen. I've got a criminal case in The Hague, Holland against Beijing, and a case in Jerusalem, Israel, and we're going to have more in other countries, because the world is on its knees right now. And the people of every country have been betrayed by their government, and they know that. And there's a huge push towards socialism and communism, which began in the universities, and now it's become endemic. There's a huge wave of anti-Semitism and anti-Christianity in our schools. Even, I'm Jewish like you are, Charles. I guess you're Jewish, Moscowitz.
Yep.
And even the young Jewish kids that come out of university these days are taught to be anti-Semites. It's like out of a Woody Allen film.
I've seen this. It's horrendous. And I mean, it's a classic example of what's going on more broadly in society. Now, you're talking about the citizen grand jury, which I am really fascinated by. Could there be a situation, because I think that it's obvious that people who are involved with really what can only be called high crimes are walking around free, and I'm talking about this whole business of spying on Trump as a candidate and president. This is subversive activity. Nixon had to resign for a lot less than this. And yet they are walking around without any charge. They're arrogant, they're cocky, they're strutting around. Could a citizen grand jury bring these charges against them and hear this evidence and gather the kind of testimony and result in and bring about convictions? And if so, how could that happen?
We've already done that. Last fall we did it, and we're waiting to resume it when COVID subsides and we can bring people together in a more intimate way. But Dr. Jerome Corsi, who I represented in Mueller's witch hunt, and I kept him from getting indicted. Roger Stone was indicted and convicted. They were all wrapped up in the same investigation. Is that Jerry Corsi testified in front of a citizens grand jury that Mueller had attempted to coerce him to lie under oath to implicate the president, and if he would not lie, that he would be indicted. And since he's in his 70s, that would probably be life imprisonment, the equivalent of that. And I had brought strong lawsuits against Mueller and others, and we got Mueller to back off. But that's an example. Now we're waiting to try Mueller. So we get a retired judge or someone who will serve as a judge. You don't even have to be a lawyer to be a judge in most states.
Yeah.
In fact,
I even think of the Supreme Court, you don't have to be a lawyer if you're appointed.
You're probably better off if you're not a lawyer. You haven't been corrupted.
I think Earl Warren was not a lawyer, actually.
There have been several Supreme Court justices who have not been lawyers.
Yeah.
And you can Google it and Wikipedia it, for lack of a better place to go.
Yeah.
Even they have to admit that. Then you try them in front of a jury. You can pick a petit jury just like you do, in the regular court. You try them, you seek a conviction. If you get a conviction, you sentence them and you seek to mete out the sentence. Now, it's going to get to that point. I mean, look at Wyatt Earp. What did he do in the Old West? He
meted out justice. He met them at high noon.
Yeah, and when they killed his brothers, Morgan and Virgil, he hunted them down and killed them, right? I'm not advocating killing anybody.
I understand.
But there was no system of justice in those days that could be responsive to the needs of the people, much less his family. So he took matters into his own hands. He was never indicted for it. And this is, I think, where the country is headed. And again, I don't advocate the violent means, but we're headed. And, suppose we indict Hillary Clinton, we try her and convict her. I actually did do that several years ago. I didn't seek to mete out the sentence over national security breaches with Iran. But we could stand in front of her house in Washington, D.C., demand that she comes out. At least we'll be educating the American people that we have our own fate in our own hands. And there are things that we can do with the federal judges, too. Of course, I don't think Congress will do it, but it's a misnomer to think that they have life tenure. That's not in the Constitution. They're not there for life. Neither the Supreme Court justices nor the lower court judges. They serve for good behavior. So Congress, if we had a real Congress, could make it clear that perhaps we could set term limits for them, 5 years, renewable for good behavior, have that reviewed by legal experts and responsible people. Of course, that's, wishful. And they don't have immunity either. The Supreme Court gave themselves immunity and gave the lower court judges immunity. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives the judges immunity for making intentionally wrong decisions, political decisions, and decisions that harm the people of the United States. And that's where we are. And I might say one other thing. We're now going into a so-called confirmation hearing for Amy Coney Barrett.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I personally, and I think you probably agree with me, I can tell the little bit that we've interacted here,
right,
is that I frankly don't care that much, who's on the Supreme Court. I don't, because you can gauge with 100% certainty, except for Chief Justice Roberts, who's flipped. The deep state obviously has something on him.
Yeah, that seems to be.
And I had a whistleblower that had confirmed that they had dirt on him.
And I think we all know what that dirt is, but we don't necessarily need to get into that.
Well, we don't have to get into it, but say he's been living in a closet. Yeah, he's been living in a closet all these years. So,
right. Okay.
But a legal closet and otherwise, and I'm not homophobic, and neither are you.
I understand.
So, but in his generation, that's something that he doesn't want out, and this is the problem, mm-hmm. and if they issue decisions which violate the Constitution and violate the natural law and the law of God, it's my view we have no obligation to follow their rulings. And I believe that. And I have clients that will tell you that, ex-judges who feel the same way, because they're by and large, with few exceptions, I like Justice Thomas. I think Justice Alito is pretty good. But the rest of them are a bunch of political hacks and robes, and on both sides. And look at Kavanaugh. He's going left too.
Oh, I know. He was never the conservative that we thought he was. And, the idea of originalism and contextualism, that seems to be out the window, really. And they're acting like dictators. They're almost acting like their own, Continental Congress in a way. They're rewriting the Constitution. I'm hopeful for Barrett. I think at least it's an improvement. I think that what's telling is that that the way to stop her, they're attacking her in anti-Catholic bigotry, and her religion, which makes me think that they feel threatened by her, and I hope she gets on. And I think if Trump wins, there's a hope. And maybe I'm being a little Pollyanna-ish here, but once he gets beyond the election, I think that he may start to move in the right direction, because I think Trump knows the score. He knows what's going on with this.
I hope so. And I personally, I don't endorse him as the head of a public interest group, but Larry Klayman does. Yeah. I personally hope he wins. And I think that God at this point is going to need to intervene, because he's done himself a lot of damage in the last few weeks, unfortunately. Right. And that middle ground, that 20%, it appears a lot of it is turned off. That's the problem. He can't win just on his base. But let's hope he wins. But even if he wins, is that it's only for 4 years. And it's likely that the Congress is going to go totally Democratic. It's likely right now. And, I think a lot of conservatives will vote for Trump, but they won't vote for Republican establishment people who have done nothing, during these years. And we, the people, need to rise up. And that's the message of my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, mm-hmm. is that the founding fathers tried to reason with King George. They pleaded with him. They wanted to remain part of Great Britain, the British Empire. But he turned their back on him. And he and his hack yes men judges, and they were just men in those days,
right,
rubber stamped everything that he wanted. They confiscated our guns. They overly taxed us, as Biden and Kamala Harris intend to do, as since the fact that the Democrats have turned socialist and borderline communist. Mm-hmm. And they busted into our homes, reason for the Fourth Amendment, looted what we owned. We see the looting now with the left, raping our women, killing us. And the colonialists said, enough is enough and enough is too much, like Popeye, and they said, we have to form a new nation.
They also, if I could interject, they also took away our money. They took away the scrip and they replaced it with Bank of England notes. And a result was a depression for the first time in
That's
colonial
right.
history. So,
And the moral to the story is that King George and his hacks on the bench, in my view, as someone who studies history, were less threatening than what we've got now in the Democratic Party.
it's
These people,
unbelievable.
these people are insane. They're socialists. They're communists. They're anti-Semites. They're anti-white. They're anti-everything. And it's.
Clearly.
I believe in equality for everybody. And right now, there's this huge push. If you're white, you're born with a racist gene. That's their philosophy now. They've adopted Louis Farrakhan with that.
They have. And this whole business of so-called systemic racism, the more conservative approach is to approach specific racism. Like, for example, the Biden crime bill, which put all these innocent black men in prison. And I think Trump tried to do that with the First Step Act, which released 10,000 people, predominantly black, or the racism in the public education system. And I think Trump is trying to redress that by allowing for free choice and tax credits for charter schools and private schools for these poor black kids who are locked into these liberal-run, gigantic public institutions. So, instead of fanning these flames and creating this sense of envy and galvanizing people's, actual prejudice, we ought to take a look at practical solutions like what you're offering here, Larry, in terms of a judicial solution.
Yeah, and the solution goes beyond that too. So you have to get the book. I'll leave a little bit to be read. I want you to read it.
Oh, thank you.
It's really a pleasure to get to know you, Charles. But because, see, during the years leading up to our first revolution, it was the printing press that coalesced the colonies, that brought them together, that educated them. And education is extremely important. It's more important than filing court cases right now.
Oh, yeah.
We have to get to the people and get them to understand. And I hope that people can profit from my 43-year history of fighting, not in the swamp, but in the cesspool of Washington, D.C. It's much worse than a swamp.
Oh, yeah, it's awful.
And it just, in the last few days, Nancy Pelosi, that evil witch, we got...
Yeah, absolutely.
Says that we should, she wants to legislate and modify the 25th Amendment to remove Trump for his alleged psychological problems. Okay, now this woman has major psychological problems, and yet she is considered to be a leader of the Democrat Party, and she gets deference, and people bow down to her. Even our own people in the Jewish left bow down to her.
The bigger they bow more than anybody. I think that she is very conscious of what she's doing. She's the head of the deep state, in that they will do anything they can to stop Trump. They've tried to investigate him with that brown shirts, the Mueller group, and they're breaking into people's homes, taking them away. Oh, and they've tried to impeach him for the perfect phone call, and then now they're trying to remove him for this. I mean, it's just, I don't. Maybe it's a propaganda tactic to put in the minds of people maybe that Trump is not mentally well, because they know they can't actually get away with it. That might be it. But either way, it's evil, and it's despicable.
Well, and you talk about somebody who isn't mentally well. It's Joe Biden who's not mentally well.
Yeah,
I think.
Meanwhile, yeah.
I think he has the onset of Alzheimer's, and if we elect him, he'll probably be doing coloring books in short order in the Oval Office.
Yeah, and AOC will be running the country. No, exactly. I mean, it's and it's all been swept under the rug. I mean, God forbid they get away with that.
Well, and that's, but we have to plan for that. Okay, so let's hope for the best and plan for the worst.
Yes.
And even if Trump wins, it's 4 years, and this slide towards socialism is going to continue. I had an individual called Ivan Bolashenko on my show today from Poland. He's an evangelical Christian in Poland, in a Catholic country. Not Catholicism like we know here, but Catholicism which has become, regrettably, an extension of the socialist Polish state over there.
That's too bad.
And it is too bad. And he's being persecuted, and his group's being persecuted. And, he tells you about the fact that the socialism is so endemic that it really never left, even after the Soviet Union over there.
Yeah. And plus, they have the problem of a pope who's obviously a socialist. But
well, he was actually a communist at one time. He modified himself.
He was a Peronist in Argentina.
Yeah.
So that's a major problem. I do think the church still is enough. It's a big enough institution that there are good people in there who know how to fly the ship right. But
Well, I'm not anti-Catholic. My kids are Catholic. I've married several Catholics in my day.
Okay.
Marry the Shiksas, right? So it's a very fine religion, but it's not being run by the right people.
They need to get the ship of state floating right, I think. So we have the election coming up in a few weeks. We've got this stuffing the ballots with these phony, hundreds of thousands of ballots, even in Massachusetts, my own state, and in New York, where my left-wing mother-in-law has gotten a phony ballot, and she's scratching her head. It doesn't have it's almost made out, or it has these errors on it. And, obviously, if someone is so concerned about the virus, they can get an absentee ballot the old-fashioned way. But there's no excuse for this. Yet they're getting away with it. You've got some judges who are stepping up, but you've got other states which are allowing it to go forward. Do you think that it's going to happen? I mean, are they going to steal the election by stuffing the ballot?
100%. And we have to be prepared for that. And that's one of the reasons for my book. Another plug. It takes a revolution, because they will steal it, and it's going to cause a civil war. And Trump, frankly, would be right not to leave until the matter's settled. But then where are you going to settle it? In the courts? The courts still are heavily Obama and Clinton appointees, the federal judges. And you can gauge with 99.9% certainty, maybe 100, how they're going to rule based upon who appointed them. And that's the real tragedy of our legal system. We delude ourselves, Charles, in saying that we have the Cadillac of a legal system, but I've always said we have drunken drivers at the wheel. And this is what we're dealing with. These people have more power, a federal judge,
it's awesome,
than a congressman or a senator, and in some ways, even the president of the United States. They can make or break your life. They can destroy you. And the Obama and Clinton judges in particular, most of them I've been in front of, they have no compunction in doing real harm to you if they disagree with you politically.
I mean, a good example of that is Judge Sullivan in the district in the federal bench in Washington. What he's done to Lieutenant General Michael Flynn.
It's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad. But let me just add one thing on that one.
Yep.
Is that there was a time, I've been in front of Judge Sullivan many times, where he was a fair man. Okay, even though he was a Democrat, he was initially appointed by Bush the dad to the Superior Court, and he then ultimately was appointed to the federal bench by Clinton. But the current environment in Washington, D.C. is so polarized, so evil on the left. They control everything. They control the media. They control the legal profession. They control the bar associations. And they are trying to destroy anyone who is pro-Trump and conservative. And unfortunately, Sullivan has thrown his lot in with this mob. It's sad, because at one time he was a decent judge.
Yeah, it's an awesome abuse of power. So, Larry, let my listeners and viewers know where they can get your excellent book. And I've really enjoyed talking with you. I will read your book. I hope to have you back. Please do that. Please let my viewers know.
Yes. It's called It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, meaning get up off the couch, turn the TV off, and get to work. And you can get it at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Books A Million, Borders.com, all major booksellers. You can pre-order it. I think they're going to go quickly, because what I say is completely different than, say, Sean Hannity. In his new book, he gives his monologue, and
then same old warmed over crapola.
And then I mean, ending with, and the Democrats say we're throwing Granny over the cliff. Okay.
I mean,
so mine is not, let's not depend on anybody. There's no political messiah here. There's no Moses. We have to do it for ourselves. And God is with us, and we will prevail in the end.
That's right, because truth prevails. Anyway, Larry Klayman, thanks so much again for joining me this afternoon. It's been an honor, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Mutually, Charles. Thank you.